Hi there, I'm Ahsan Shaw, and you are watching me on YouTube and Facebook Live. Today we are going to talk about economic warfare versus spiritual warfare. The economic warfare, it may seem like the topic that we have discussed it in the last week, and we have discussed it, its current and historical perspective in detail. And today we are going to talk about since it is a vast issue, so we are going to discuss many other perspective. It's very many other perspective. Like uh, when we talk about the economic warfare, it may seem like an economic and business issue, and it is an economic and business issue, but on the surface. But in reality, is one perspective that is it just an economic issue, or is it just a means to satisfy our own inner desires and demons? Or the other perspective is the economic spirituality. Uh, the economic spirituality, in a sense that we have to implement the concept of right and wrong in our lives as an individually and collectively, and also economic spirituality. Then the whole it manifests itself uh, in the whole economy. And to discuss this topic, my guest is none other than Edward Konowicz. Now it's time to introduce him to you.
Yeah, hi, Hassan Ali.
Hi,
Um,
Ed. How are you?
I'm a little tired. I was busy studying last night,
Uh,
so
okay.
I stayed up late. But anyway, I
Okay.
wanted to be prepared for today, so
Okay.
I did about 5 hours of study.
Okay. So are you prepared now? What do you think about economic spirituality? I think we ended our discussion last week on economic spirituality and spiritual warfare.
Yeah, I'm going to have to tie things together. I'm going to make three separate points or
Hmm.
three separate topics,
Okay.
and I want to kind of offer proof or a lot of evidence for
Hmm.
those three separate topics.
Hmm.
And we covered some of them, but of course we want new territory. We want to be able to cover new ideas today. And
Okay.
the three separate topics is one, corporations, particularly international corporations, have
Hmm.
become the governments. I
Hmm.
mean, President Trump or President, if he is elected Biden,
Hmm.
they'll come and go.
Hmm.
Presidents and leaders come and go, but Bill Gates, as the head of Microsoft and then his corporate foundation, he's there
Don't
for
forget,
decades.
don't forget
So,
Mark Zuckerberg. He's
yeah.
also the head of social media, one of the largest social media platform, Facebook.
So the tech giants
Hmm.
have replaced the countries.
Hmm.
Though there's some attempt of different countries regulating the tech giants, such as
Hmm.
Microsoft, Google, and
Hmm.
um, and Facebook, the
Hmm.
tech giants actually dominate the world. So when we're
Hmm.
talking about warfare, we're
Hmm.
talking about warfare or economic warfare
Hmm.
waged by the tech giants.
Hmm.
And besides the tech giants, there's two other industries, the
Hmm.
pharmaceutical industry, which is the
Hmm.
medical industrial complex, and the
Hmm.
military industrial complex. And those two are merging.
Hmm.
We see in the United States and England, both
Hmm.
England and the United States intend to implement or apply their armies to give out the vaccines, and the
Hmm.
corporations are in control of the vaccines. There's no independent review of them.
Hmm.
They're evaluating their own product and almost making it mandatory against the public.
Hmm.
So we're dealing with war being waged by corporations. That's one
Hmm.
idea.
Mhm.
Now, another idea that we covered is
Mhm.
economics is based on credibility. What
Mhm.
principles do people have interest in? Which is when you put money in the bank, it's the principal, and then
Mhm.
you're if you get interest on that. And that's the same thing if you invest in stocks. You believe in
Mhm.
a corporation, and then
Mhm.
the stock is supposed to increase or pay dividends.
Mhm.
And the third idea, besides credibility, is justification.
Mhm.
Are you justified in what you're doing? And
Mhm.
justification is very close to credibility, but that's where religion comes in because religion becomes a justification and a belief
Mhm.
system.
Mhm.
But I want to develop the three ideas a little bit and tie them together. The
Mhm.
first idea became very evident with Nazi Germany, I.G. Farben, Krupp, Arms. Different corporations became the major supplier of Germany, and
Mhm.
particularly with the Swiss banks. The
Mhm.
Swiss banks funded the concentration camps. The concentration camps were set up as labor camps to make a high profit. And that's going on in the United States. Many of the prisoners have to do labor or fight forest fires for something like 50 cents an hour.
Mhm.
So slave labor is being done in the United States through the prisons.
Mhm.
And that's what Nazi Germany did and is very similar. And so we're seeing kind of a repeat in the development of the East Indian Company. The East
Mhm.
Indian Company of Britain actually had more troops than Britain. They deployed something like 150,000 troops to India and China, which is
Mhm.
a lot of troops, not as
That's
much
why I
as
was.
during World War II.
Mhm.
But
For
so,
just a company.
and there's spiritual economics.
Mhm.
And the spiritual economics we don't see much because it takes a prophet or a Buddha or a saint
Mhm.
to reach the
Mhm.
level of having spiritual economics.
Mhm.
And that's denied because basically modern corporations are based on a belief in materialism. They don't
Mhm.
believe there's any gods or God or higher consciousness that influence things.
Mhm.
And I like to give two examples of spiritual economics.
Okay.
One, one is, of course, Moses, and
Mhm.
Moses leaves Egypt, and they don't have a source of food. They're wandering in the wilderness or desert, and
Mhm.
manna drops from heaven, and every
Mhm.
morning they collect food.
Mhm.
So that's spiritual economics. Another
Mhm.
example is it's Buddhist, it's Tibetan Buddhist, is Milarepa, the 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 Tibetan Buddha. And I'm not
Mhm.
sure if I'm pronouncing the name correctly,
Okay.
Milarepa. But anyway, he goes to meditate in a cave,
Mhm.
and when he quote reaches enlightenment or understanding, he's
Mhm.
almost dead because he hasn't eaten or drank any water, and the animals bring him food. The animals
Mhm.
recognize the work he did in terms of meditation, and
Mhm.
they bring him food. So that's kind of an Eastern view of,
Mhm.
and then of course we have in Christianity and in Buddhism,
Mhm.
we have missionaries being sent with just the clothes on their back. Bodhidharma in probably Buddhism is best known for it. He takes nothing with him but a cane or walking stick and clothes and a sack, and he's able to survive and be fed.
Mhm.
He doesn't have a job. He doesn't have a land. He's not farming. He's a mendicant, which is he's a begging missionary.
Mhm.
And of course, that's supposedly what the disciples of Jesus or Isa or Yeshua, whatever you want to call him,
Mhm.
they went and they traveled hundreds, if not thousands of miles, and they had faith in spiritual economics that they were going to live and be able to be fed and clothed.
Mhm.
So all those three things really are related.
Mm-hmm.
And today, if we remember so let me summarize because it's the
Okay.
first time some people hear. One, today it's economic warfare being waged
Mm-hmm.
by corporations, and they're
Mm-hmm.
not necessarily competing with each other.
Mm-hmm.
The economic warfare is being done by making people buy their product.
Mm-hmm.
And then the second thing which I covered was the third thing which I just was spiritual economics
What
and
about what
the
about the spiritual warfare?
the what
Spiritual
spiritual
warfare.
warfare. Yeah, is
Yes.
to impose the greater good. Today,
Mm-hmm.
the economic warfare is
Mm-hmm.
claiming they are for the greater good. See, religion generally claimed it was for the individual good. The individual had to be saved or go to heaven. And now the spirit, the justification or credibility by the corporations is that they're acting for the greater good. So let me
Mm-hmm.
repeat the three things. One is corporations are waging war more than countries.
And
Number two,
they have also replaced the government. They are
the
the modern uh, what do we call it? Authoritarians.
they're the modern tyrants or authoritarians
Mm-hmm.
are the CEOs of corporations.
Mm-hmm.
And the third thing we've talked about um, is the principles or the value system that is put into effect economically, which is there's a claim by corporations like the pharmaceutical corporations that some people will be harmed by the vaccines,
Mm-hmm.
but the vaccines are for the greater good.
Mm-hmm.
So we hear the phrase today a lot, the greater good.
Mm-hmm.
It used to be for security. I mean, Hitler was conquering Europe, claiming he was securing Europe from communism.
Mm-hmm.
So, so, and Bill Gates is conquering with his remote classroom, remote business applications, claiming he's saving people from disease.
Mm-hmm.
So, um, the
Think
three
it.
things there's three things going on here. One is
Mm-hmm.
corporations are taking over government.
Mm-hmm.
Two, it's based on their principles or their greater good, their justification. And
Mm-hmm.
three, there is spiritual economics. And
Mm-hmm.
I gave the example of
Um,
Moses
mm-hmm.
and Jesus also. I mean, Jesus be like a lily of the field, his
Mm-hmm.
disciples, and then finally the Buddhist
Mm-hmm.
figure of Milarepa, who
Mm-hmm.
went to a cave and waited for animals to bring him food.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I think we see all of these
Mm-hmm.
in the battles of World War II. And
Mm-hmm.
people overlook this because the United States and England control much of the world history propaganda, so they
Mm-hmm.
overlook what happened in Russia. But during
Mm-hmm.
World War II, it's
Mm-hmm.
estimated someplace around 30 million to 40
Mm-hmm.
million Russians died on the Eastern Front. 30 million people is a lot. That's much
Mm-hmm.
larger than the population of New York City.
Mm-hmm.
So the two big battles that I think we need to look at was the Battle of Leningrad and the Battle of Stalingrad.
Okay.
And this I'm going to say something no one else says, and it is relatively true, which
Mm-hmm.
is there's a book written about it that Hitler was the Third Reich. The
Mm-hmm.
First Reich was the Roman Empire.
Mm-hmm.
The second one was the Holy Roman Empire. And
Mm-hmm.
he was the Third Reich of Rome. And
Mm-hmm.
Heil Hitler is the same thing as Hail Caesar. So he
Mhm.
saw himself as the new Führer, which really was emperor.
Mhm.
And where we get that is all the Catholic countries of Europe united under Hitler to go
Mhm.
after the atheist communists. Let me repeat that. Most of the
Mhm.
Catholic countries of Europe, which is Italy,
Mhm.
Germany, Holland,
Mhm.
Belgium, France,
Mhm.
Austria, Czechoslovakia, most of the
Mhm.
Catholic nations united to attack Russia, which was communist or atheist.
Mhm.
And the that's discredited. We're told it was just Germany. It wasn't just Germany. It was all
Mhm.
of Catholic Europe, and Ireland, which was Catholic, sided with the Germans. So did
Mhm.
initially Mexico and Central America and South America. The Catholic countries of the world united to support Hitler. And Hitler invaded Russia with about 4 million troops, which
Mhm.
was the largest invasion in history.
Mhm.
And the largest battles in history were fought.
Mhm.
And
So,
Leningrad,
but
this,
the problem is, we were told and we are taught, the mainstream media tells us that it was only the Hitler he was attacking all over the Europe.
yeah, would you repeat that? It broke up.
Okay, the mainstream media and the books did tell us that it was Hitler and he was attacking the whole Europe.
Yeah, Hitler was the leader, but he was the leader of the Catholic nations.
Mhm.
The Catholic nations like Poland and France fell in hours. They did not
Mhm.
give significant resistance. When it got to the non Catholic nations like England and Russia, there was extensive fighting for years.
Mhm.
And so we tend not to view World War II in religious terms, but it
Mhm.
was based upon beliefs.
Mhm.
And of course, one of the major tactics of attacking a city was siege or to cut off their supplies.
Mhm.
And this is very interesting. If you read about the attack on Leningrad, there was
Mhm.
about, oh, I think it was 3 million people living around Leningrad,
Mhm.
and 1 million of them died. I
Mhm.
mean, we look at Hiroshima and Nagasaki with a minimum of 80,000 apiece dying, and probably many more died later, which is being denied.
Mhm.
But Leningrad, supposedly 1 million civilians died. I
Mhm.
mean, 1 million. This is makes
Mhm.
Hiroshima, one magnitude lower. Of course,
Mhm.
Hiroshima, Nagasaki was 100,000, and Leningrad was 1 million. And
Mhm.
Hitler gave the order, though his armies were at the door of Leningrad, not to enter Leningrad.
Mhm.
He had won basically the battle. He could have taken Leningrad,
But
and
he did
why?
not.
But he did not. And the reason
Mhm.
is interesting. He
Mhm.
said that he doesn't want to be responsible for all those people starving or being killed.
Mhm.
So he will let the Russians control their city, so they're held responsible for the death of 1 million people,
Mhm.
which is he wanted to be justified. Hitler felt, according to records,
Mhm.
that to take the city, he now is responsible for the city and he would be
Mhm.
blamed for the deaths.
Mhm.
And that's sort of spiritual. Not that Hitler was spiritual, as Hitler did
Mhm.
not want to be blamed.
Mhm.
And that was actually a fatal mistake. By not entering Leningrad, the Soviets were able to bring more troops and military equipment into the area and
Mhm.
eventually defeat the Germans.
Mhm.
So Hitler and his generals, his field marshals, were willing to risk the war in order not to be condemned for millions of people dying under their control.
Mhm. But they have already killed millions of people.
But most of them were troops,
Mhm.
supposedly. They
Okay.
didn't. This was a
But
big city, which
mhm.
was who was going to be responsible for the logistics.
Mhm.
So the big case, and this is about warfare. If you have a
Mhm.
professional killer,
Mhm.
he spends more time trying to figure out who his patsy is going to be or what his alibi is going to be than
Mhm.
killing. Like a professional killer knows how to kill. He's not worrying about how he's going to kill someone. He's worrying about being blamed.
Mhm.
He wants someone else blamed, so you have a patsy, like most people feel after reading the facts of the Kennedy assassination that Lee Harvey Oswald did not kill Kennedy, that he was a
Mhm.
patsy. He was someone set up to be blamed for the murder.
Mhm.
So this is where it gets spiritual.
Mhm.
The people in power don't want to be blamed, they want to be blessed. So
Mhm.
Bill Gates, he doesn't want to conquer the world as a CEO of Microsoft.
Mhm.
So he becomes a CEO of charities. And
Mhm.
by being a captain of charities
Mhm.
rather than of Microsoft, he can claim he's benevolent. He can
Mhm.
claim he's a philanthropist. So today's generals, the people who
He
wage
wants to
war
be.
on people,
He
disguise
wants to be.
themselves
He
as
wants to be a
philanthropists.
savior.
He wants to be a savior.
Mhm.
Julius Caesar saw himself the same way. Julius
Mhm.
Caesar saw himself as a savior protecting people from the barbarians.
Mhm.
So the people who wage war at this point are
Mhm.
the ones that control large corporations, and they wage the war from charities or foundations
Mhm.
claiming they're saviors
Mhm.
because justification is part of economic warfare.
Mhm.
And what do they do with their charities? They sell their products.
Mhm.
And there's two major industries today. There's the medical industrial complex and the
Mhm. And the
military.
military.
And
Mhm.
a large part of the military industrial complex is nuclear reactors.
Mhm.
And nuclear reactors all leak.
Mhm.
They all leak tritium, which is
Mhm.
radioactive water, because they use water to cool,
Mhm.
and most of them use water to moderate the neutrons, which is slow them down so there can be a chain reaction. Basically,
Mhm.
nuclear energy is passing around neutrons, but the
Mhm.
neutrons move too fast, so you have to slow them down, and you slow them down with water or some other material. And when they're slowed down, other atoms catch the neutrons, and then they split. And when the atom splits, all this
Mhm.
energy is released.
Mhm.
But the two most dangerous, I think, I mean, this is my opinion, the two
Mhm.
most dangerous threats to mankind is plutonium, which is
Mhm.
a product of a nuclear reactor, and tritium, or tritium oxide, which is radioactive water. And the
Mhm.
reason why tritium or radioactive water is so dangerous is you drink it. It's in the
Mhm.
air, it's water vapor. So it
Mhm.
actually gets into your cells as water. And when it splits, which is when one of the neutrons turns into a proton and an electron, that electron can ionize your DNA or break your DNA, mutate it.
Mhm.
So cancer is a result of radioactivity, which is the ionizing radiation,
Mhm.
damages your cells internally. So you
Mhm.
usually have to ingest radioactive material.
Mhm.
And if it's radioactive water being released, For
mm,
example, at Fukushima, in those tanks around Fukushima is stored 100 million tons,
mm,
100 million tons of radioactive water. So we have two major propagandas. One, nuclear energy is supposedly safe and effective. And if
mm,
you stand up against that and say it's not safe and is too costly, you can lose your job.
okay.
And the second propaganda is vaccines are safe and effective. And if you
Mm,
stand up against that and say, no, not all vaccines are safe and not all are effective, you can lose your job,
mm,
which is you're fired. Today, you're
mm,
not burned out at stake. Today, you're fired from a job. You lose your source of income and you're
mm.
driven homeless. And
They will cut
homelessness
off.
is
They will cut
an
off your supplies.
right. They cut off your supply. So it's economic warfare.
Mm,
You used to be arrested. I mean, Julian
mm,
Assange was arrested. But for
mm,
telling the truth, he used to be arrested
mm,
and called a heretic and burnt
mm,
at the stake or crucified or tortured or killed.
mm,
Today, if you tell the truth and say, well, nuclear energy is not safe, it's not cheap, it's very dangerous, it's mostly used for nuclear weaponry, or if you say vaccines are damaging,
mm,
people are having seizures and becoming crippled from them, a few, but a significant amount of people. And
mm,
if you tell the truth, you're now
mm,
anti science. Rather than
mm,
being called a heretic, the claim is you're anti science, and any expert that you quote is now supposed to be seen as a quack or
mm,
not a legitimate expert. So the major propaganda claims it's science. It doesn't claim
mm,
it's Islam or Christianity or Judaism. The religion today is referred to as scientism, which is the corporations determine what is science.
mm,
So economic warfare is being waged by calling people who disagree with these corporations as
mm,
anti science. For
mm,
example, Pfizer is claiming its vaccine is 90 or 95% successful. There's no
mm,
independent study. There's no other university professors testing the
mm,
vaccine or looking over the studies and allowed to criticize it. So the corporation is in power, not a government, a corporation. And they
mm,
claim their studies, which are known to be fraudulent.
mm,
These corporations that supply vaccines have been
mm,
fined billions of dollars for lying about their drugs.
mm,
They've been fined billions of dollars. They are documented criminals,
mm,
but we're supposed to believe they're lying. It is a dishonest science. The corporations throw out wrongful data. They present data wrong. For example, a placebo should be a saline solution. Instead, they're using like the meningococcal vaccine as the control, which is a harmful vaccine. They're not using proper controls. They're not allowing third parties to do the studies. They're doing the studies themselves. And then rather than claim it's Christianity, they claim
mm.
it's science. And if you criticize their study or their product, if you point to
You'll
the
be
damage, you'll
you'll
be
be labeled.
characterized
They will label
anti
you as anti-science.
anti-science.
Mm,
And as anti-science, that means you're stupid, you're ignorant, and
mm,
incompetent. You should not have a job. You're too stupid to have a job. You're anti-science. That is
mm,
economic warfare, which is to cut off your supplies. And the whole COVID 19 is economic warfare because small businesses are being closed for
mm,
the major big tech companies. The big tech
mm,
companies like Amazon, Google, Microsoft, they're doing better than ever. But
mm,
people who have small shops who sell food restaurants, clothing. The small businessmen are being destroyed by economic
Mhm.
warfare.
Yes.
And it's sort of spiritual in the sense that what you sow, you reap. People
Mhm.
have been tolerating these philanthropists who are not charitable. This is ridiculous. These
Mhm.
CEOs who have been very ruthless business owners now want to parade around as philanthropists.
Mhm.
And if you challenge them, you're supposedly selfish, mean, cruel. If you don't want to wear the mask, you're selfish, you're anti-science, you're mean,
Mhm.
and you're cruel, and you could be fired. You if you're not willing to wear the mask or get the vaccine, you may lose your job, which is today
Mhm.
is economic warfare based on principles of what you believe
Mhm.
in.
Mhm. Even
So we're
some countries are passing the laws against about wearing masks in public spaces and also going to the hospitals and other institutions or any department. So we are going to see a legitimacy and the regulations uh, to impose to force people to follow the law to be in the line.
yeah, we're and basically the corporations are handing the laws to the
Hmm.
parliamentary members or congressmen, and the congressmen are just basically rubber stamping what the corporations want to impose. And
Hmm.
there's two industries. There's really three industries. There's the tech industry,
Hmm.
there's the medical industrial complex, and then there's the military industrial complex, and that is epitomized with the nuclear weaponry. And
Hmm.
what people need to understand is a fuel rod is actually more dangerous. You don't have spent fuel rods, they're not spent.
Hmm.
They have plutonium in it, and
Hmm.
plutonium is the most dangerous element known to man. And
Hmm.
these fuel rods are just as dangerous. They have to be in a pool of water for at least 10 years, probably
Hmm.
50. And during those 10 years, that water has to be pumped and changed because it will evaporate from the heat of the fuel rods. So even
Hmm.
after a nuclear reactor is shut down, it
Hmm.
takes about 50 years. People have to be there running the fuel um, rod pools and monitoring the situation for 50 years. And no
Hmm.
country or state wants the nuclear fuel because the nuclear fuel will eat
Hmm.
through any container. So
Hmm.
you have to repackage it. Otherwise, the radioactivity is going to get out. And what may be the most dangerous poison in the world is radioactive water because you swallow it and ingest it. And
Hmm.
whether it's the nuclear fuel pools or the nuclear reactor itself, they're cooled by water. And that
Hmm.
water becomes contaminated with extra neutrons. And if you ingest that, you can get cancer. So the epidemic is not COVID 19.
It's the
The
cancer.
epidemic is cancer.
Hmm.
And the corporations that control this want to get us distracted and focus on COVID 19 and viruses so we don't look at the epidemic of cancer. When I was young, children didn't get cancer.
Hmm.
Very few children ever had cancer.
Hmm.
What has happened is the environment has become more toxic, like Wuhan. Wuhan
Hmm.
became very toxic, which is these corporations to save money did not properly collect their toxins, did not filter the air and the water to save
Hmm.
money or profiteering. So
Hmm.
today, these corporations are really waging war on people. But it's
mm,
spiritual because the people get smart if they get informed of the dangers of vaccines, the ones that don't work, the criminality of the pharmaceutical industry, the
mhm,
dishonesty of the nuclear industry, the
mhm,
influence of the military and medical industrial complexes. So the
mhm,
war today is a biological warfare. It's economic and biological.
mhm. And those corporations, they want to be called as saviors.
They want to be seen as saviors. So what
Mm,
happens is the CEOs start, and this is even the, President Trump and supposedly who's going to be President Biden. I don't think
mhm,
he's been elected yet. They have their own they had their own charities.
mhm,
All these brutal corporate heads and politicians like the Clintons claim they're
mhm,
saviors with charities, and they're using their charities to impose economic warfare.
mhm,
So we have to stop seeing philanthropists as good. They're
mhm,
waging economic warfare on the people.
mhm.
I'm going to have a little sip of tea.
Okay, okay, no problem. So, what I gather from it so far, that those corporations, they want to be seen as saviors, and they are selling their products and services under under the disguise of philanthropy. So
Well, right, they're promoting it. They're
yes,
selling
they are
them through
selling it.
laws. They're
Yes.
selling them through the government. They're controlling the governments of the world, and
Mhm,
they're actually selling their products through the government. And of course, we
mhm,
pay taxes. It's not like when the government buys their product, like buys their
mhm,
vaccines or buys their software to detect your location. It's
mhm,
not like we're not paying for it because we're being taxed. The corporations have taken over government and are waging economic warfare against the
mhm,
people. And rather than being called a heretic, you're being called anti science. So
mhm,
this is an information warfare,
mhm,
which is people have to become informed and aware of the dangers of nuclear energy, such as
mhm,
radioactive water or tritium.
mhm,
And they need to realize a lot of people may be dying not from viruses, but from
from
radiation
the
poisoning.
mhm,
Radon and plutonium, the first symptoms of radiation poisoning with radon or plutonium is difficulty in breathing. You can't
mhm,
breathe because it attacks the lungs when you get plutonium or radioactive water or you get radon in your lungs. The lungs
mhm,
are very delicate and get damaged. And second of all, radioactivity attacks the stem cells in the bone marrow.
mhm,
And as a result of that, you get defective white blood cells and red blood cells. And this is
mhm,
being hidden from the public.
mhm,
A nuclear reactor above New York City was shut down at Indian Point. And they said, oh, it was too expensive. But
mhm,
nuclear reactors expense is making them because you've got
mhm,
all the permits, the purchasing of land, the building of the structure. Once the nuclear reactor is working, it's not
mhm,
expensive, it's cheap.
mhm,
It's fuel disposal is expensive.
mhm,
And we're now coming to the second generation, not of nuclear reactors, but of nuclear disaster. The
mhm,
first generation was nuclear reactor meltdowns, which we
mhm,
had at SL1 in Idaho, 3 Mile Island, little meltdown at Windscale with one or two rods melting down, Chernobyl, and
Chernobyl.
Fukushima was the worst. We're being
Mhm,
lied to.
Mhm.
Fukushima was 3 reactors melting down with no
Mhm.
containment,
Mhm.
where Chernobyl was 1 reactor melting down with containment. They were able
Mhm.
to bury the reactor under a sarcophagus of concrete. They could
Mhm.
not do that at Fukushima.
Mhm.
Fukushima has 4 times the fuel that Chernobyl did, and it's being cooled by water, and that water that's going past the cores, the melted cores, is spilling into the ocean.
Mhm.
So Fukushima is much worse than Chernobyl. Now, this is what people don't know.
Mhm.
A Geiger counter cannot detect tritium. Geiger
Mhm.
counter cannot directly detect radon. So
Mhm.
when someone uses a Geiger counter, they can't detect all the radiation.
Mhm.
So the authorities can say we took a Geiger counter and there was no radiation, but a
Mhm.
Geiger counter doesn't detect all the radiation.
Because you are not using the right tools.
Right, you're not using the right tool. You need a bunch of tools.
Mhm.
One tool is not going to work.
Mhm.
And all this is not explained to the public because the public is supposed to believe nuclear energy
It's safe.
is safe and effective when it is not.
Yes. And the big corporations are using the nuclear energy for our own safety and to produce safe electricity.
Yeah. And but we're at the point, do
Mm.
you want a brand new car and a big house and die young with cancer, or do
Mhm.
you want a small car or a motorcycle or a scooter and a
Mhm.
small house and live a ripe, healthy old age?
Mhm.
And we have to, and this is where it's spiritual, we need
Mhm.
to choose our health and the
Mhm.
well being of our family over greed. That's
Mhm.
spiritual.
Mhm.
We shouldn't get greedy because the greediness, and I see that, the word Pluto comes from wealth. A plutarch, I think, is someone who's wealthy. So
Mhm.
plutonium comes out of the nuclear reactors. It's sort of like more greed. And these
Mhm.
philanthropists who are really the new generals waging war on people.
Mhm.
The generals today are the corporate heads, like Bill Gates, who are waging war by pushing their product via government. And they're
Mhm.
bribing. They're actually bribing agencies and things like World Health Organizations by giving
Mhm.
them millions of dollars, if not billions of dollars, which are
Mhm.
bribes. But
Mhm.
because they're charity, it's not seen as a bribe.
Mhm. But
If
because
if they were a CEO of a corporation and gave that money to congressmen, it would be seen as a bribe. But they
mhm.
become philanthropists, give the money as charities to other charities, and they're seen as good guys when they're really
Mhm.
bribing so
Mhm.
that their products can be distributed.
Yes, there's always a hidden reason attached to millions of dollars.
Yeah, so and because if someone gives you $1 million, you don't want to get them angry.
Yes.
And so all these charities really should be banned. Most of these charities, like the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, are
Mhm.
are basically bribes to get their products approved. And
Mhm.
the products right now are vaccines and nuclear energy.
Mhm.
How are they going to get nuclear energy after Chernobyl, Fukushima, Three
Mhm.
Mile Island, and other very dangerous, damaging meltdowns approved? Is they bribe government officials through charities, through organizations,
Mhm.
through non-governmental or NGOs, non-governmental organizations, and then
Mhm.
the corporations actually and the charities hand the laws to the parliamentary members, the parliament members, and the congressmen, and they actually pass the laws that are handed to them. So we
mhm,
are in World War III or IV, depending on how you count. And it's an
mhm,
economic biological warfare done largely through charities. The charities are killing people. That's
mhm,
what's so crazy about it. The charities are promoting nuclear energy and they're promoting vaccines that have not been
mhm,
properly tested. And they're blaming viruses rather than
mhm,
the industrial toxins. This is the
mhm,
change. These
mhm,
charities are being used as a front for corporations to blame the toxic
mhm,
effects of, of insecticides, herbicides, nuclear energy, um,
mhm,
blaming them on viruses.
mhm,
So the pneumonia in Wuhan was not supposed to be blamed on the air pollution.
mhm,
It never was good. The doctors were not supposed to diagnose the pneumonia in Wuhan, China, as a problem of air pollution.
mhm,
Rather, they were supposed to diagnose it as caused by a virus. The
mhm,
people of New York City, if they were contaminated by radioactive water from Indian Point reactor 30 miles away that was leaking
mhm,
excessive amount of tritium, are supposed to be diagnosed with
mhm.
COVID. And radioactive poisoning, do you know who it affects the most? The
So,
elderly. The
mhm,
elderly are the first ones to die from radioactive poisoning, and it's their lungs.
mhm. And also
So,
the young children.
and young, no, not young children. The reason is radioactivity
Mhm,
damages your DNA, and
mhm,
children have a better ability to repair their DNA. You can look at me. I would have here, I would look young if I could repair my DNA. So
mhm,
radioactivity
mhm,
is damaging the DNA, and the younger you are, the easier
mhm,
it is to repair the damage. The
mhm,
older you get, the supposedly the shorter your telomeres on your
mhm,
DNA, the more difficult is it for you to repair DNA.
mhm,
So these elderly dying on the coast of the United States, Washington, Oregon, California,
mhm,
this may be from radioactive poisoning.
mhm. It's a possibility.
And the corporations are using these charities to deny the toxicity. They want to
Mhm,
blame, they want carbon dioxide as the new boogeyman. Carbon
mhm,
dioxide is not toxic to people at zero point
mhm.
0.4 of a percent, which is
So
what's in
they
the atmosphere.
they are leading the people in the wrong direction. They
Yes,
are distracting the attention of people towards to the wrong tree.
right. They're directing people's attention to the carbon footprint
Mhm,
and to viruses like COVID-19 rather
mhm,
than the lead in the water
mhm,
of Flint, Michigan, rather than the herbicides, the
mhm,
insecticides, rather than the radioactive water. They're
mhm,
misdirecting people through their charities at
mhm,
carbon footprint and viruses rather than the toxins that are most likely, and I mean this, most likely doing most of the health damage,
mhm.
which is
It's
what's an
highly
epidemic is lung disease, and lung
mhm,
disease is an epidemic because of pollution, not because
mhm,
of carbon footprint, not
mhm,
because of viruses, but because of pollution.
mhm. And
Like
the
asbestos.
pollution is the
Asbestos,
pollution. It's a
asbestosis. Let me
mhm,
just cover these 2 points.
okay.
Both smoking and asbestos were hidden by
Mhm,
a criminal medical profession
mhm,
for about 50 years. For 50 years, doctors knew that smoking cigarettes and working with asbestos caused lung disease, and they
mhm,
hid it. they lied with the tobacco industry and the
mhm,
asbestos industry because both industries sponsored studies and the scientists are not subject to peer review. They're
mhm,
subject to payroll review. The
mhm,
scientists to get the grants had to return the results the tobacco industry wanted, the results that the asbestos industry wanted.
mhm,
Scientists are not saints. When they
mhm,
get a degree, there's no degree in ethics.
mhm,
People are assuming scientists that work for these corporations are ethical,
mhm.
or who these scientists that work for these charities are ethical. They're not.
They are just doing their jobs to
Right.
defending
And
their bosses.
their job is defending their bosses that
Mhm,
write their paycheck.
mhm,
And so we have this delusionary thinking
mhm,
where science has become a religion, where the scientists sponsored by corporations or government are supposed to be seen as good, working for the greater good. And if you challenge this, you're called anti science.
mhm,
So if I say no, nuclear reactors are too dangerous and expensive, anti science. If I
mhm,
say some vaccines are damaging the nervous system of children and adults and are not really worthwhile, they do more harm than good, anti science.
mhm.
If I said COVID-19 is not as much of a problem as toxins,
You
then
are
I'm anti
anti-vaccine.
science. Right, I'm anti vaccines.
Mhm,
So it's the same thing as the Dark Ages. Instead of
mhm,
being called a heretic or a witch and burnt at
mhm,
the stake, you're called
mhm,
anti science and ignorant and
mhm,
selfish, and you're fired, and his
mhm,
economic warfare is waged against you.
mhm.
But I think it's also deeply spiritual. Now, what's kind
Mhm.
of interesting,
So,
I
speaking
mean,
of spiritual, I think we haven't discussed fully the topic, the spiritual side of it, the spiritual warfare, and the economic spirituality. We
yeah,
have discussed about. Okay.
yeah, we haven't really addressed that, but let's look at the evolution
Mhm,
of religion.
mhm,
Under the Romans and the
mhm,
Greeks,
mhm,
if you were religious,
mhm,
you were like a Hercules. You got strong and wealthy. In fact, there was an emperor, I forget his name, who saw
mhm,
himself almost as the reincarnation of Hercules.
mhm,
And Henry VIII was a little bit like that. Henry VIII of England, when he
mhm,
was young, he was an extremely powerful athlete and would be in these medieval competitions, and he would win them. Sometimes, because he was king, he was allowed to win, but he was very powerful and athletic. So there was this belief that if you were spiritual, you would be very strong, like Hercules or Samson.
mhm,
And then the prophet Isa or Yeshua, Jesus, he said, no,
mhm,
if you're spiritually correct, you're going to be able to heal other people. You'll be healthier. No one
mhm,
sees Jesus with big muscles.
mhm,
Jesus was not a wealthy person, or
mhm,
Yeshua or Isa. He said spirituality would make you healthier. And
mhm,
then Buddha said spirituality would make you more peaceful, would reduce your suffering. You wouldn't be in as much pain.
mhm,
And so today, spirituality is, oh, you're going to obey science.
mhm,
Today, the priesthood is doctors.
mhm,
If you're feeling bad or you're depressed, you're supposed to go to a doctor.
mhm.
If you feel weak or tired, you're supposed to go to a doctor. So the priesthood today is
Is
doctors,
mhm,
and that's where the disagreement was a little bit with Jesus. The philosophy underlying Jesus's thinking is is that sin or allowing bad spiritual forces or demons, which could
mhm,
be greed,
mhm,
would get you unhealthy, particularly your soul. And it's
mhm,
difficult. Why it's difficult is people who get along with culture, which is people who promote vaccines, nuclear energy, the
mhm,
foundations, they have less resistance in culture, so they generally do better than someone
mhm,
who tries to tell the truth, because the person telling the truth gets all this stereotyping. They're
mhm.
anti-science, they're selfish, they're cruel, so
They
they're
are negative.
facing a yeah, they're facing a lot of resistance.
Mhm,
So we kind of need a new spiritual movement where people are intelligent enough to resist the wrongdoing and still survive. So the
mhm,
question is, see, the Abrahamic religions, which was
mhm,
Judaism and Islam and Christianity, sort of felt that if you were with God, you had
mhm,
political power.
mhm,
So all the leaders, whether they're in the Middle East or they're in Israel or they're in Europe,
mhm,
they all pretended they were holy. They all
mhm,
pretended they were close to God or Allah.
mhm,
So, and what was unusual about the United States tried to separate church and state, is the
mhm,
expression, but they tried to not have an established religion, which is, um, I think, spiritual. You have freedom
mhm,
of choice. You
mhm,
believe what your inner light or your intelligence have led you to believe, and it shouldn't be
mhm,
forced. People
mhm,
shouldn't be forced to believe in science or Christianity or Islam or Judaism or atheism. You should not be forced to accept someone else's belief. And the problem with spiritual warfare is we don't have any spiritual leaders.
yes,
And
we are
it's
told.
hard for people to
Mhm,
learn on their own. We
mhm,
have no, I really feel I can say this. There are no
mhm,
spiritual masters or leaders.
mhm,
And the ones who are promoted are corrupt. They're political.
mhm.
They're promoting the vaccines, they're promoting the
The
wrongful
wrong.
medicine. And
Mhm,
let me just say this because it's so true
mhm,
in the West.
okay.
Psychiatry is supposed to be seen as helping people,
Mhm. But
but
it is not.
it is not, because as psychiatric medicine is being implemented, more people are getting mentally ill, not less.
Mhm,
As psychiatry is brought into the schools, more
mhm,
children are diagnosed as mentally ill.
mhm,
Psychiatry is not reducing mental
mhm.
illness, it's
It's
increasing it.
increasing it. Mhm,
And the same thing with like the antidepressive medication. As
mhm,
people get depressed and they're given medication, more of them commit suicide, not less.
mhm,
So if people are on antidepressive drugs and more of them commit suicide, how is the drug working?
mhm,
It's not working.
mhm.
So the
But people don't
corporations,
question. But people don't question the drugs. They are told that drug is good.
yeah,
The medicine
and
is good.
they don't look at other alternative solutions.
Mhm,
So the corporations, particularly with psychiatry, are really
mhm,
waging spiritual war, because a lot of your mental health is based on your ethics, your standards, your relationships to other people. It's
mhm,
somewhat a spiritual matter.
mhm. And we need
And
spiritual leaders.
you need spiritual leaders to give you more faith and goodness, because if
Mhm,
if you lose faith and goodness and
mhm,
see the world as too hard, you're going to be
mhm.
depressed. So
That.
the and for some reason, there are no spiritual leaders.
Mhm,
And the ones who are promoted as that are busy promoting the political leaders, are busy promoting the corporations.
Mm-hmm.
which is they're no different than the scientists working for Pfizer or Hoffman or Roche or these other companies.
Mm-hmm.
These spiritual leaders are getting money from these charities and corporations, and they're really working for the corporations.
Mm-hmm.
And you can see that. The people who pretend they're spiritual leaders, they're promoting vaccines.
Mm-hmm.
They're not promoting closeness to God. They're not promoting ethics. They're not promoting your inner light. They're not promoting what is spiritual.
They're promoting their own product.
Their own product, their own belief system, and they're promoting themselves as compassionate and concerned. Because
Mm-hmm.
someone says they're compassionate does not
Mm-hmm.
make them compassionate. It
Mm-hmm.
isn't about talk, it's about how you live.
Mm. So
We're at
I
an
think
hour, so
we have covered enough, and we have discussed. Uh, we started our discussion from the three major points. The first is the tech giants company. The second is the medical industry, and the third is military complex. And
particularly
they,
nuclear energy.
yes, nuclear energy. They are the new tyrants, and they are waging an economic warfare across the world, and they are disguising their warfare uh, under their philanthropy and charity, and they want to be seen as savior. And we ended our discussion at the spiritual leaders. We need good people uh, to 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 impose goodness and to spread. We need a self-conscious at an individual level, so the people could then we will be able to see the change collectively. Isn't it right?
Yes, I think so. And it's very difficult to become a spiritual leader. It only happens a few times in history.
Mm-hmm,
We don't really have many spiritual leaders
mm-hmm,
among human beings.
mm-hmm. I think that's it for today. If you have any questions, leave it in the comment box below, and I'll get back to you as soon as I can. Thank you and good night.
Good
Okay,
night.
okay, bye now.